no cheese, Gromit. Gromit, that's it, cheese. We'll go somewhere where there's cheese.
It's funny you say that, Wallace, because it says here the government is hiding £1.2 billion of cheese under the US.
What the hell was that?
Calling home planet. This is Ensign Kang reporting a cigar-shaped object moving at tremendous speed.
Sure, Kang. I'm writing it all down. Reporting.
You heard me correct. The United States government has been actively storing over £1.4 billion of cheese. Now, I promise, this isn't as sinister as it sounds. They're not planning for some sort of nuclear holocaust. No, in fact, the cheese has been stored for more than 50 years now. Deep within converted limestone caverns within Missouri, these so-called cheese caves have been storing government-owned cheese since the 1970s, beginning due to the national dairy shortage. Jimmy Carter decided to throw money into the dairy industry because of this shortage, in an attempt to increase production and subsequently yield, so that the, at the time, 30% inflation of dairy products could be relieved a little bit. Now, when I say he threw some money at the dairy industry, he threw $2 billion their way. It doesn't take a genius to see how that much money could increase production to an, quite frankly, over-the-top degree. The government had a genius plan though. Any excess cheese would be purchased by the government to keep economical prices low. Of course, they did not count for how much cheese would be overproduced. By 1980, the United States government had bought and now owned over 500 million pounds of cheese. Just to put it into comparison for those of you who don't understand how much fucking cheese this is, okay? This is an Antonov AN-225 Marine cargo aircraft, clocking in at a measly 1.28 million pounds. This is the CERN particle accelerator, also coming in at just a measly 4 million pounds. This, as we all know, is the Washington Monument, only 162.24 million pounds. This is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier at only 204 million pounds. The government owns 2.5 aircraft carriers of cheese in underground caves. Now I realise, out of context, I sound like a cultist, or a crackhead, or a fucking insane person, but I promise you, this is all 100% true. In fact, it somehow gets even worse. Of course, the government kind of shit themselves when finding out how much cheese they now own and began giving the excess to charities and food banks, which only reached around 60 million pounds of cheese distributed, and that idea did not really last very long. By as recently as 2019, the cheese number has only gone up, now from 500 million to 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. And for some reason, the US government is still throwing money into the dairy industry. I'm not going to get political because I don't know all the facts. I'm just here to make sure you're aware of cool cheese caves. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out that 1.4 billion pounds of cheese is enough cheese not to throw money into dairy products. What's also funny is that 35% of the US population is actually lactose intolerant. As of now, the latest update is from 2022. The cheese amount has risen to £1.5 billion. However, a new initiative has been put into place entitling seniors over the age of 60 to one 32-ounce block of cheese per month at no cost, which is always nice. Ultimately, I believe the cheese initiative and the overproduction of said cheese originated from a good place. Jimmy Carter set out to fix an economical problem, and whether you like it or not, he did it. He just overshot by quite a lot, and as such has helped the economy and kept jobs alive. Just now the government has £1.5 billion of cheese in Springfield limestone caves, and not many people know about it. I'm gonna go play Cheese Escape on fucking Roblox or something. I'm kind of hungry for some cheese now. The year is 1790. George Washington gives the first State of Union. The first case of artificial insemination was recorded by John Hunter. The French Revolutionary and the American Revolutionary War begin. The Oxford Canal is opened, and one fat Frenchman can't stop eating. What a great year to be alive. I mean, besides the influenza epidemic, but then again, I guess technically I have already lived through one of those and came out fine, so. This is Terere, the man who could and did eat pretty much anything to subside his insatiable appetite. By just 17, he had a reputation for being able to eat his entire body weight in food in just one single day. In his early life, he travelled with a caravan of criminals. However, his family abandoned him as they couldn't keep sustaining his eating habit, forcing Terere to roam the French country for several years before landing a solo act in Paris. During the French War of the First Coalition, a military surgeon, Dr. Pierre-Francois Percy, had the unfortunate privilege of meeting Terere when he came across him after Terere was admitted to the army hospital after passing out from exhaustion. Terere was a soldier now, but that didn't stop his eating one bit. He would eat up to 4 military rations, foraging through dunghills for scraps of food, doing jobs for other personnel's rations, yet these did not work, and he escalated to eating garbage and stealing other patients' food. Even at one point, eating hospital bandages in an attempt to stop his hunger. Dr. Percy conducted many psychological tests, yet all of them pointed to Terere being pretty much entirely sane. Terere was described as having constant bloodshot eyes with an odour that could be smelt from miles away, which is a lot for, 18th century Frenchmen. It's basically the modern day equivalent of a Reddit user. Percy, being fascinated, probably looking for a way to document this bizarre behaviour, started experimenting with Terere. First, he'd give him a meal meant for 15 people, where he would then devour it. Next, things escalated to live animals such as cats, lizards, snakes, puppies, and even once a whole eel. What is most bizarre is that the French military decided to weaponize Terere's eating by sending him as a spy under the guise of a courier delivering a document, where they hid the document inside of his stomach. After successfully delivering said document across enemy lines, he was then rewarded with a wheelbarrow full of raw bull viscera, and he completely devoured the whole thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he ate the fucking wheelbarrow as well. His next mission was to swallow a whole wooden box containing more documents to be delivered to a prisoner in Prussia. Terere, after a mission where he was beaten and tortured by Germans, was deemed unfit to continue his military service, and as such was once again forced to walk the streets fighting dogs over scraps and eating garbage straight from the street. He'd also drink the blood of patients and even eat dead bodies in morgues. Perhaps most disturbingly in his entire life is that a toddler went missing from said hospital, and it's incredibly suspected that Terere had eaten the child, and as such was chased away into the city. Dr. Percy was later contacted by a doctor in Versailles hospital about a patient on his deathbed, which of course was Terere. Dr. Percy hoped to help Terere after theorizing that golden fork had eaten, maybe killing him. However, in the end, it turned out to be tuberculosis that killed him. That is, in short, the life and subsequent death of Terere the Eater. We may never know just what to extent this behemoth of a human ate, but perhaps more disappointingly, we may never know how he came to have such an unquenchable appetite. It's a short story, it's a short life. The man ate what he wanted to eat and then died. Fair play to him. Do you remember the musical Hamilton? Lin-Manuel Miranda created the show to remember one of America's less remembered founding fathers, and to a lesser extent, chronicle his achievements. Well, I don't claim to have the brilliant mind and talents of Lin-Manuel Miranda, and no, unfortunately for you, me, and everyone involved, I will not be creating or singing a musical. I will instead today be telling you the story of one of the world's most important figures that had their entire idea stolen and faded into deep obscurity. This is the story of the Landlord's Game. We've all heard of Monopoly, the long boring game that has killed so many friendships and broke even more families apart. Well, it may shock you to learn that the entire idea of Monopoly was essentially stolen from a woman called Elizabeth Maggie. In 1903, Maggie invented this, the first design for a game named the Landlord's Game. The premise of being a grubby landlord swiping up as much land as possible was based off the economical principles of Georgism, which for those who don't know, was a philosophy created by Henry George, which stood for the idea that people should own the land of which they produce themselves. However, the economical value of land, including natural resources, should belong to all members of society. I feel like fucking Socrates or Plato. I fucking hate philosophy. I'm never covering philosophy on this channel. You will never see a video about philosophy ever, I promise you that. The game was based off of the idea that the rent enriches property owners and impoverishes tenants. She believed that not everyone would easily understand the philosophy, so her idea was to put it into a simple form as simple as possible, in the form of a board game, in hopes it would be easier to demonstrate to people and for them to grasp the concept of. She strongly believed as well that this method of representation may help children to learn at a younger age about said philosophy, and so that they may carry those lessons into adulthood. In fact, this rabbit hole kinda goes even further into the past. Unlike Monopoly, which is a direct rip-off of the Landlord's Game, Zon Al, or Creekwood, which you can see now, is a Kiowan India game, with some striking similarities to an early version of the board and mechanics. It's possible that Maggie took inspiration from Zon Al, but there's enough difference between the two games not to warrant her having have stolen the whole idea. Back to 1903, and Maggie decided to file a patent for the game, which was then granted the next year under the US patent 748,826. She would then go on to form a company called Economic Game Company in 1906 to be able to publish said game. You may be asking, what proof do I have that the Parker brothers, the guys who made Monopoly, stole the idea? Well, there's no actual solid evidence, but there's something that's pretty damn near solid, close enough to evidence. Along with the incorporators of EGC, E.H. Monroe and E.G. Lenbusher, Maggie approached the brothers in hopes of publishing two games, one of which being Landlord's Game. While they both saw products, they decided to take on the other game as the Landlord's Game was apparently too complicated for people to grasp the concept of. The Landlord's Game would eventually get published in 1913 in the UK under a different name, Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit. Landlord sold well enough in the northeastern United States, however Brer was ultimately unsuccessful. Jumping back to 1910, Scott Nearing, a socialist professor who just happened to work in Wharton School of Finance, the place Maggie had invented the game, had caught wind of the concept and had taught it to his students, who all fell in love and subsequently began creating their own interpretations, with different names like Monopoly, Finance, and Auction. It was Jesse and Eugene Browford who first used household objects instead of little pawn pieces, and also changed their names of many places to the names of places in Atlantic City where they lived. Further on in 1924, Maggie acquired the second patent for the Landlord's Game and published it again in 1932. The Parker brothers, at the time, had been tasked with creating their own version of the game, called Fortune, before attempting to just outright buy the patent from Maggie, which, after waiting until the patent expired, ended up selling to the brothers for £500, or just roughly about $11,500 back in that day. Charles Darrow, another person to reinvent the original Landlord's Game, sold the game Monopoly, which he had claimed to have invented, where in reality he was just a long line of people reinventing the same game that Maggie ultimately created from the start. The brothers ran a short set of the Landlord's Game before tossing it aside for Charles Darrow's version in 1936. Maggie went public in interviews to discredit the fact that Charles had invented the game by showing her own game and previous patents. After a long line of creating and selling, the first ever edition of the Parker Brothers game, Monopoly, was released in 1935 and has gone on to create thousands, if not tens of thousands, of different collaborations and editions of the game, ranging from normal topics like Game of Thrones Monopoly or Hello Kitty Monopoly to weird interactions like Monopoly bass fishing or Monopoly dog artist. The game has been ranged to have made around... well, we don't actually know how much it's made, but it's estimated in the UK alone to sell about 114,286 games annually, which for roughly £19 a board is estimated at bringing in about £2,741,434. This is just an annual estimate, as no actual number has ever been publicly produced for some reason or another. Monopoly has been a monumental success over the years. While we can all sit and enjoy the game, let's not forget where the game originally came from. Elizabeth Magie, in my opinion, deserves as much, if not more, recognition for creating the essential base idea for Monopoly as the Parker Brothers and Hasbro have for publishing it. However, as is the way with history, she'll probably unfortunately just keep fading into history, among with other great geniuses who honestly don't get enough credit for all the credit they're due. Ah yes, the troll face, a staple of internet culture, something so important that would set the foundation for social media and generational humor as a whole that is still influenced by its foundations even today. The first recorded trollface was in September 19th, 2008 in Microsoft Paint by a Carlos Ramirez. However, today we're not talking about the trollface or any memes at all. No, I want to talk about the original OG troller, Lengrad G. Capers. Grand Query Capers Jr. was born April 1834 in South Carolina and went on to serve on General William J. Worth's staff during the Mexican-American War. He went on to study medicine and graduated from Jefferson Medical College, and during the American Civil War assisted in the foundation of the Confederate Medical Department in Alabama, and in 1863 was promoted to chief surgeon in the Cutshaw Battalion. When the war ended, he moved to New Orleans of all places and became a teacher of medicine. He later died in 1877 from tuberculosis, much like Terere. Now you're probably thinking, fuck me, that was fast, and well, yeah, aside from being a pioneer of medicine and an essential staff to the war effort, he pretty much had a straightforward life. That was until 1863. A passage by Lengrand states a story like this. I'm going to try and do my best doctor impression, which is just a deep-voiced British man, and I'm talking about fucking pyrocynical. I'm not going to sit here and go, "Hey guys, on the 12th of May, 1863. No, I'm going to try and do my best doctor impression. On the 12th day of May, 1863, the Battle of R was fought. Our men were fighting nobly, but pressed by superior numbers, had gradually fallen back to within 150 yards of the house. My position being near my regiment, suddenly I beheld a noble, gallant young friend staggering closer, and then fell to the earth. In the same moment, a piercing scream from the house reached my ear. I was soon by the side of the young man, and upon examination, found a compound fracture with extensive comminution of the left tibia. The ball had ricocheted from these parts, and in its onward flight, passed through the scrotum, carrying away the left testicle. Scarcely had I finished dressing the wounds of this poor fellow, when the estimable matron came running to me in the greatest distress, begging me to go to one of her daughters, who, she informed me, had been badly wounded a few minutes before. Hastening to the house, I found that the eldest of the young ladies has indeed received a most serious wound. A mini-ball had penetrated the left abdominal parietes, about midway between the umbilicus and the anterior spinal process of the ilium. It was lost in the abdominal cavity, leaving a ragged wound behind. Believing there was little or no hope of her recovery, I had only time to prescribe an anodyne, when our army fell back, leaving both field and village in the hands of the enemy. About 6 months after her recovery, the movements of the army brought me again to the village of R, and it was again sent to see the young lady. She appeared in excellent health and spirits, but her abdomen had become enormously enlarged, so much so to resemble pregnancy at the 7th or 8th month. Indeed, had I not known the family and the facts of the abdominal wound, I should have pronounced the case. Under the above circumstances, I failed to give a positive diagnosis. Determining to keep the case under surveillance, just 278 days from the date of the receipt of the wound by the mini-ball, I delivered the same young lady of a fine boy weighing 8 pounds. About 3 weeks after from this date of this remarkable birth, I was called to see the child, the grandmother insisting there was something wrong about the genitals. Examination revealed an enlarged, swollen, sensitive scrotum, containing on the right side a hard, roughened substance, evidently foreign. I decided upon operating for its removal at once, and in doing so, extracted from the scrotum a mini-ball, mashed and battered as if it had some sort of flight or some hard, unyielding substance. In short, he was documenting a story about how a Virginian farmer girl was near a battle, a bullet penetrated and flew out the scrotum of a young man and ended up somehow getting her pregnant, to which she gave birth 9 months later, which would technically and theoretically created the world's first artificial insemination. As cool as that would have been, this is all unfortunately a gag made up. In 1874, the original article to publish this title was first called Attention Gynecologists, Notes from the Diary of a Field and Hospital Surgeon. The gag story had been hit and miss throughout history as either funny or people just didn't get the humour. Some have gone on to praise it for its exploration of creative theorising in the medical field, and while it is very, very unlikely to ever occur, it is technically theoretically possible. However, the circumstances would have to be perfect and exact. Upon editing this, I also found out that the Mythbusters covered this idea in their 2005 episode, Son of a Gun, where the duo found it to be false as no sperm was ever found alive on the bullet, and that the impact of the wound on the abdominal area would have most likely been fatal. Nonetheless, like the original joke itself, it's fun to theorise, yet it will still go down in history as one of the earliest mass trolls in all time. And, you know, it happened in a time of a Great Depression. The America was at war, everybody was depressed, nothing was good. And quite frankly, I believe they probably needed a good laugh, and as was the humour at the time, I suppose. I mean, I don't find this particularly fucking funny. I find it interesting as a concept, but I wouldn't, you know, I'm not splitting my sides of the story. I mean, I don't really get how it's a joke, but, you know, I mean, I like to theorise about it. I mean, if they managed to get a kick out of it, then, you know, power to them. At least he did something right. To finish off this episode, I want to talk about something that is actually important to me. It's the story of a beautiful community, created around one thing that would create lifelong friends, a beautiful tale of how gaming should be, an example of socializing in its rawest form that can only be achieved mainly now in chat room games, a real interaction between strangers that can blossom into something more, and the item that brought all of this together is cabbage. The story of this cult begins with one RuneScape player, Blackbane. Blackbane started his RuneScape career by searching out free Java games. He found RuneScape and played it off and on for about 4 years, but he was never satisfied with playing the game normally. So after leveling his woodcutting to 46, which pleased him to be doing such a pointless skill, he began a cooking clan called the Cooks Unite. It had roughly 9 members, and people came from all over to party with the cooks. Fires were lit all over the place, beer and food were given away, and it was all in good fun. There was something just not completely satisfying about the Cooks Unite, but the chef hat-wearing crazy people set a standard for looking odd that would carry on in later years. Flash forward, Bane stops playing RuneScape for several months at a time, and misses out on every holiday drop, and began playing again with his friend Coop_32, who would actually become his roommate later in real life. Bane tried several money-making schemes, including building a network of limpwork collectors that he sold for 200 to 500% markup to members buyers. He then thought, what's the point? Why do I do this? His limpwork collecting was done at the Hobgoblin Peninsula, and when he needed healing he went to the nearby cabbage patch. Blackbane had been collecting limpworks for so long, and he had an epiphany one day. What's the difference between clicking on rocks, killing hobgoblins, cutting trees, or picking cabbage. And so he put down the sword, he took off his armour, and he donned his old favourite suit, a dark priest gown, and began diligently picking away to his heart's content. Conversing with some people, he began picking the monastery cabbage and banking in the Edgeville Bank, where he was spotted by someone who was burying bones. This opened up Blackbane to start vocalising his newfound love of picking cabbage, and the two friends amused each other in their goals. One would bury thousands of bones, the other would pick cabbage, but to what end? The first 1,000 cabbage go by, then 10,000. His mind slowly turns into a leafy spiral, as his posts on Tippet become crazier and spammier, juggling 3 topics always on the first page, all devoted to cabbage. The main thing that kept people interested was no one could bring him down. He devoted his RuneScape life to cabbage at level 62, and he has been that level ever since. So where does the Order of Cabbage fit in? One person from the early days picked late into the night with Bane. He donated in 3,000 increments. People had been stopping by the patch at Draenor, the new location on World 17, the Canadian server of which Bane is closest to, and had been asking when they would start a clan. A clan. What a boring idea. So the two mused together and came up with a concept. A cult. At first it was jokingly put, but then the idea made more sense. What if we made a group dedicated to the cabbage, and all that joy the cabbage brings? I mean, cabbage is the coolest thing in RuneScape. But the two did their work in secret, for a cult must be mysterious, so upon converting people to the love of cabbage, JFP221 of cabbage picking renown and Blackbane found people who wanted to start a cult, and the most enthusiastic of the bunch who wanted to start a cult were let in on a magical secret. There already was one. The Order of the Cabbage. What I've just read is an insert from the Green Book of Knowledge, the cult's quote-unquote Bible created by the cult's lawmaster Iggy. The Green Book contains all lore from the beginning to end, and you can probably find a complete manuscript copy somewhere. The Order of Cabbage makes it clear, very clear, that you should only apply to join as a member if you share and reflect the goals set out by the cult. Their ideals and goals follow as such. Picking cabbage is strangely addictive. RuneScape is not about stats, it's about having fun. Onions, potatoes, and Draenor Manor, cabbages, are evil. To have the largest stash ever of cabbage is our goal. To help new players enjoy their experience in the game is important. To teach others the joy of cabbage is essential. To make RuneScape a fun and more social place, and to meet new friends, is just as important as the rest. Ultimately, the goal of the cult was to create a social place where people can join and socialise, however, above all, enjoy cabbage. They also had a dedicated uniform, which I am rocking now, kinda, more like a half-complete uniform. The original set consisted of an apron, black shirt and pants, and a chef's hat, however was later rectified and improved to become a dark priest clothes, a red amulet and chef's hat accompanied with a staff of fire and leather boots, optionally red gloves. The symbolicism of the uniform stands for many things, but above all they make the cult stand out and offer equality. As stated in the Green Book, we believe in equality. Blackbane may be the leader, but he isn't above anyone. He may have more responsibility and have more say in how things are run, but that does not put him above anyone else. He doesn't wear party hats or carry a fancy staff to show that he is the leader. He shows leadership by his actions. The Green Book also lists off what you should say when faced with conflict from other players speaking to you in a negative way. Essentially, they all describe responding with kindness or non-caring response. It's clear the cult just wants to enjoy the game and socialise and have zero ulterior motives. They are, above all else, peaceful cabbage farmers. This is further implied when asked about their stance on the copycat cults and such. The stance has always been just to let them be. They pick cabbage for fun, never to compete. In fact, some of the rules also suggest to encourage these cults to invite to hang out with them. Of course, wherever you have something great, you will always have those who want to bring it down. Enter the stew. In the early days of the Order of the Cabbage, public reception was either they loved it or they wanted it eradicated, and as such many rival cults came and faded just as fast. Much like the OOC enjoyed picking cabbage, a rival cult began gaining traction. However, they picked potatoes. Perhaps the worst of this rivalry is that the members of the OOC were being misled into believing the words of these deceivers and joined over to the dark side. However, the OOC stood tall and began growing more and prevailing, whilst every second the stew grew bigger, and thus the secret war began. The reception of both groups were shaky, so in order to not compromise their ideals of peace and socializing, they engaged in what they would call a secret war that the public of RuneScape were not made aware of. This war was not fought with swords and shields, or any weapons, actually. In fact, it was fought in forums and chat rooms, each group debating the harvest that they so worshipped and its significance to them. Eventually the stew began losing its traction, while Blackbane kept the community in good spirits, and eventually the rest of the potato lovers faded into obscurity. The group created whole PDFs on farming patterns to abide by, and even cabbage-themed minigames, and even a last stand emergency protocol in case violence was ever needed for defense. The Order of Cabbage has since dissolved. Unfortunately, RuneScape is nowhere near its popularity since its inception, and as such, the Order has changed over time. But with most of its members out there probably growing up and, developing lives and having responsibilities and jobs, and probably even kids at this point in time, it was bound to happen eventually. To end off, I'd like to read an extract from a Reddit post from Blackbane that summarizes his experience and goals of the Order. I was 17 to 19 when I started RuneScape, and now I'm 37. I look back on the Cabbage days fondly as such a weird part of my life. To know there's this giant thing that I started that is still continuing on to this day that is its own thing now. If I take anything away from this experience, it is this. Why you do something is so much more important than what you do or say. Don't try to change the world, start with making one small change in your life and commit to doing it every day. Don't try to make an impact on the world yourself. When you start making a positive change for yourself, look to those around you and bring them with you on the journey. Those people together will go farther than anything you try and do yourself. A lot of life feels like luck, and there is that element, but anything you commit to and consistently do has an exponentially greater chance of turning into something big. Be grateful for what you have, no matter how bad life gets or how little you think you have. When you focus on gratefulness, you find opportunities that you would otherwise have missed. To all my OOC friends who read this and occasionally Google Order of Cabbage, I know you do too, thank you everyone for being part of something world-changing and special. I miss you all, and those days were incredible. To the thousands of people who have picked Cabbage and encouraged me to just be my weird self, thank you. I still have all your cabbages in my bank, I've never sold them. Thanks Gowers and Co for making a cool game. I remember when there was 50 players online at a time and many people were complaining about the game. I think you were either on the forums or maybe I saw you in game and you were venting about all the naysayers and ready to give up on RuneScape. You overcame some huge hurdles and now we just have these weird and awkward stories to tell about Cabbage. I like to think that out there are still people like me who continue to remember and document the Order and what it stands for. There are ultimately too many stories to tell that come from this cult. Too many friendships and relationships spawned from this Order. While now these bygone days are just nostalgic memories, it's probably better to focus on the great times they had. While I personally was not there to share this message that they, came up with, I too do strive for a community where we can socialize without conflict, towards one single common goal that we all share together. But I guess, as long as one person continues to have Cabbage in their heart, the Order of Cabbage and its message will always inevitably live on.